John 21 is amazing. It's the last chapter in John. It's another miraculous catch of fish story, yet it is so much more. What makes this story so amazing is it has so many double meanings, as well as humor and allusions, pronouncements, theology. Honestly, John 21 has it all. Which is its point? It's the epilogue. It's written in a way that captures the collective of all the gospel, offering us one final image of things to come and how things unfolded. Similar to how John 1 is the prologue, and we've argued earlier this year actually, that the prologue introduces us to all the major themes of the gospel. Well, the epilogue takes one more lap at all of them. I wanted you to see these themes again, and when you do, you're going to experience a rise in consciousness. So let's jump into this together. Verses 1 through 3. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out, got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. And here's the first of the double meanings. John is all about light and darkness. Go back to the prologue. You see that light shines in the darkness and darkness cannot overcome it. The Word is the true light that lightens everyone. Or you go to John 3 and Nicodemus coming at night to talk to Jesus about being born again. Or in John 7, Jesus pronounces, "I am the light of the world" at the Festival of Lights. Darkness and light, it's a major motif for John. And we see it here again. The disciples are fishing at night. That's normal. They're experienced fishermen. They know that fish bite better at night, but not this night. Tonight, they catch nothing. And this matters. The next double meaning here is that the disciples are overcome by the darkness. Even in what should be their bailiwick, fishing at night, they've caught nothing. There's no success, no reward, no promise happening in the dark for them. If you bring in the other gospel stories, then Jesus tells them they should have stayed in Jerusalem, but now they fled to Galilee. Why? Are they scared? Is this scene starting at night to show us the disciples are still fearful? When you start paying attention to these double meanings, you realize that John 21 is not just talking about fishing. This story is pointing to something much deeper than fish. Verse 4. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach. And here it is, the light of the world, arriving at daybreak. Again, double meaning. But the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Now that sounds a lot like Mary Magdalene in the garden in John 20. Again, double meaning. Verse 5. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the other side of the boat, and you will find some." Now this mimics the great catch of fish from John 6. Again, double meaning. So they cast their nets. And now they were unable to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard it was him, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in by the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. The details in this story are unreal. We don't get them in any other places in the Bible, especially the humor. Did you catch the detail about Peter? He puts on clothes to jump into the water. He's fishing in a boat with his friends, naked. You can't make this stuff up. Also, did you catch that the fish were so many that they couldn't haul it in? They had to drag them to the shore because it was so heavy. Again, double meaning. But what could that mean? I'm going to tell you in about 6 minutes. But let's keep reading. Verse 9. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Again, double meaning. Do you know where another reference to charcoal fire is in John? It's in John 18. Jesus is arrested. Peter goes to the temple courtyard, but when confronted by bystanders, he denies knowing Jesus standing by a charcoal fire. I honestly believe we're given this detail of a charcoal breakfast because we're supposed to see that this is Peter's moment, that he's being reconciled back to God. Jesus builds this fire to purify Peter's denial and to help him overcome his shame. Once you see this double meaning here, you can't unsee it. Why tell us in John 18 and 20 that both fires are made of charcoal if they're not meant to be connected? Now let's keep reading. It gets even better. Verse 10. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard, hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Again, double meaning. Jesus calls for the fish that the disciples catch. Remember in John 1, Jesus told them that he's going to make the disciples fish for people. The fish here have a double meaning for the people the disciples are going to bring to Christ in the coming days. The fish stand for the future church. Now more on that in a minute. Peter hauls the net ashore, 153 fish. Why 153? Who knows? Other than that, this is a defining reason why I think there's so much double meaning. Now, some scholars think that this captures all the different species of fish in the Sea of Galilee. Well, listen, I don't need to know how many species of fish there are, but clearly this number has significance. We just don't know what it is. For it to be that specific could very well be telling us that Jesus brings in all the types, all the fish, to be reconciled over communion. Again, double meaning. Jesus brings all people into communion with him through the work of the disciples, hauling us to Jesus. Once you see these details, you can't unsee them. And then there's the net. Did you catch that detail? It's untorn. Why tell us that unless there's a double meaning? Remember the scene at the cross in John 19? We talked about it on Good Friday. Jesus' tunic was seamless and untorn. The net that catches all fish, it too cannot be torn. This tells me that there can never be too many fish in God's abiding nets. There's room for us all. There's strength enough for us all. We can all be enraptured by the love of God, and we can all be brought forth to be reconciled unto God through communion. Is that not the power of the resurrection? I say it is. And it is all bound up here in the story about fish. That's not really about fish. Let's keep reading. Verse 12. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. This is their rise in consciousness. They know now what they're seeing. And that's what happens when we rise in consciousness. We start developing eyes to see God all around us. We start seeing the double meanings of life. We start seeing deeply the love of Christ in and through all things. Like finding Christ in the midst of this pandemic. You can close yourself off to God's presence if you want, but if you awaken yourself to God, then you see God's presence everywhere. It's in nature, with medical professionals, first responders, school systems, nonprofit communities, neighborhoods coming together. God's love is manifesting everywhere when you're conscious to it. Verses 13 and 14. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And that's the scene. You need to go back and reread John 21 slowly. There's so many details here. There's so many double meanings. John 21 reconciles moments in our past and offers us a future. This chapter is amazing. Now, I want to bring all of this together. I want to offer just two more thoughts, which I think bring together the main points of all of this. Go back to verse 5. I waited to say this until now because I needed you to see everything else. But did you catch what Jesus calls the disciples on the sea? Children. Why? This is not a common address. This is not even true. They're grown adults. Is it meant to be mockery? I don't think so. That doesn't fit. With all the double meanings flying around, what could calling the disciples children mean? Back in January, we worked through the prologue. If you remember, we said it was a highly sophisticated poem written in a chiastic structure, introducing us to the major theological themes of the gospel. And when you work your way through the prologue, you arrive at the hinge, the central singular declaration for which the entire Gospel of John and the entire Christian community turns. John 1:12. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. The Gospel of John is an epic story about how Jesus helps us become children of God, bringing us into the family of God, reconciling us unto himself. And in John 21, when the stakes are so high, the meanings of everything are doubled. The fish, the net, the night, the day, the charcoal fire, they all matter. And so does this line. Children, you've caught no fish, have you? The disciples are no longer being given the power to become children of God. Now they are children. They've received the power. And so have we. Jesus has done it. He's reconciled all of us unto himself. We are all children of God, just like the disciples. And not because they caught enough fish. They didn't catch any. They didn't earn this reward. It was a gift given unto them as it is to us, by God, through Christ, unto death, and into new life. That's how everlasting life works. We're invited into this new world because we are one of the 153 different types of fish, which is the second thing I'll close with. The fish definitely have a double meaning. They represent the future of the church, the ecclesia, those whom the disciples are to go and catch as fishers of people. And that's why I said this story directly impacts us. We are the fish. All of humanity is bound up in that lake, caught by the disciples and brought to Jesus on the seashore. The main point in all of this is the same one we see with Jesus on the cross. When Jesus is lifted up, all things are brought unto him. In John 21, when Jesus breaks bread at the seashore, all things are brought unto him. And we see from the cross to the seashore, from death to resurrection, both move us to how and when Jesus reconciles all things to himself. Jesus died for us, resurrected for us, and this communion scene is for all people, all things, everywhere. You have to raise your consciousness to see all of this, but once you do, you can't unsee it. These double meanings reveal the deep, deep truths that the Gospels and the deep truths of Easter and even the deep truths of life is that through Christ, we are reconciled unto God, all people, all places, all things. The net that holds us cannot be torn. The voice who finds us calls us children. The fire burning reconciles all of us, and we realize that we matter to God. Nothing in my lifetime has demonstrated so clearly that we are all in the net together than this pandemic. Yet we can be rest assured that even though we are in the midst of uncertainty, we are held by God. And that's how John's gospel ends. It raises our consciousness to know that all people are God's children. All places are sacred. All things matter to God.